Nothing changes instantaneously. In a gradually heating bathtub, you'd be boiled to death before you knew it. Our Father, who art in heaven. Seriously? What the actual fuck?
Welcome to Above the Garage.
Hi, friends. Today is our first in a mini-series of episodes dedicated to our final thoughts about The Handmaid's Tale. My name is Aubrey. I'm a panelist and editor for Above the Garage, and I'll be moderating these discussions, which will be a little different than what you're used to from us if you've listened to our analysis episodes in the past. On Tuesday, Kate, Kimberly, and myself discussed the series finale of The Handmaid's Tale scene by scene. But because we have a large group of panelists that have been rotating each week through our many years of producing this podcast, we wanted all of our friends to have a chance to express their opinions on how the series is wrapping up. So rather than going through episode 10 again, scene by scene, we're going to talk more generally and work through a series of topics that different people from our group would like the chance to speak about. We're going to release these recordings in a more raw, minimally edited format mixed with prepared statements. Before we get started, I just want to give a disclaimer to any new listeners that while we will be discussing broader topics such as story writing, history, politics, and feminism throughout these final episodes, today's episode will be centered on character studies with an emphasis on Nick Blaine and June Osborne. While we, of course, always value and respect all opinions, our group overall has very similar views on these characters. Though we all came to love the show from different backgrounds and for different reasons, our podcast began years ago on common ground, as a tribute to Nick and June, because they represented such a beautifully portrayed bright light in a very dark world. It feels fitting, then, that we would end how we began by highlighting our journey with these characters and their story through the years, and how we feel now that their journey has ended. We also want to wholeheartedly thank the cast and crew who graciously spent their time with us, either on Zoom interviews or during our set visit back in October. Every person we had the pleasure of meeting on set was just that, a pleasure. We learned countless details about television production, the art of filmmaking, and the heart and soul that these creative, talented, and generous people put into their work each and every day. It has given us both a greater appreciation for their craft and a broader understanding of the complicated world of media production, and it has been an extremely rewarding and captivating experience for all of us. Thank you all so much. So before we get started, let's do a round of introductions for today's panelists.
Hi, I'm Helen.
Hi, I'm Tina.
Hi, I'm Marigold.
Hi, I'm Yulia.
Hi, I'm Raquel.
Hi, I'm Scarlett.
Hi, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Aubrey. Okay, so first, Marigold is going to talk about June's background and character progression over the course of the series.
For any listeners wanting a more positive and in-depth character analysis on June, we did do one previous to the season you can find on our podcast page. I've always appreciated the show's moral ambiguity with its characters. They are three-dimensional and flawed, which made the story interesting. June is brave, smart, and a natural leader, but it became harder to root for her when her flaws are glossed over while Nick's are scrutinized. We meet June in her second Handmaid posting at the Waterford household. She's portrayed as a relatively ordinary woman trying to survive under horrific circumstances. Initially reluctant to join the resistance, she slowly begins taking risks, often being inspired by the women around her, like Moira and Alma. Throughout flashbacks in season 1 and 2, we see her pre-Gilead life, working as a book editor and starting a relationship with Luke, a married man. Despite Luke's wife, Annie, pleading with June to back off so that they can try to work on their marriage, she continues to pursue the relationship with him. We see June in a position of emotional and financial comfort and somewhat naive to the growing influence of the sons of Jacob. I loved the nuance the writers gave her in these early seasons. I can relate to her and wondering what would I do if I were in her shoes and knowing it's not easy to do the brave thing. However, as season 3 progressed, I believe June begins acting recklessly, behavior that I've suspected stems from a descent into feeling depressed and suicidal. Nick's deployment and her being responsible for Francis's death, Hannah moving further away, all seemed to break something in her. June stopped trying to protect herself, and worse, she often stopped protecting others. She decided to take advantage of Eleanor's fragile mental state to go to Hannah's school, which causes Eleanor to have a mental breakdown. Not to mention, June idly sits by as Eleanor takes her own life later that season. In season 4, Moira tells Emily, June takes the big swing and fuck the consequences. This was said in reference to Angel's Flight, which obviously heroic, but still has consequences that others have to clean up. That same disregard for consequences shows up again in Season 4 when June orchestrates the poisoning of commanders at a Jezebel's country club. The scene ends with June walking away smugly, but in the next episode we learn that many commanders were hospitalized or killed. Obviously, Gilead would punish every single Jezebel there. And what was the purpose? There was no larger coordinated attack plan, no plan to even get the Jezebels out of there. Just an opportunity to hurt Gilead and fuck the consequences. Additionally, in episode 5, we see a Mayday Martha tell Nick, "A lot of brave women died trying to protect her. Everyone that helps her ends up on the fucking wall." Nick replies, he knows, and he's sorry, but he cares about her. And the Martha tells him that he's better off without her. But somehow we are told by the writers to forget these storylines in context to Nick's betrayal. When June makes it to Canada, we see her wrestle with her own trauma as she adjusts to life outside of Gilead. In episode 7 of season 4, we see June high on feeling like she had power over Serena in prison. She comes home to Luke, sound asleep, and she wakes him up looking to further assert control over someone else. June holds down Luke's hand. Luke says wait at least 6 times, and she covers his mouth so she can continue to rape him. In the next scene, we hear her describe Serena to Tuello. She's pathological. She's a sociopath. She's toxic and abusive. She's a monster. And by the way, a consummate actress. Tuello asks, "What do you think drives her?" Hatred and rage. And underneath that, all there is nothing but pure misery. She'll do anything not to feel that way, anything to feel okay, even for just a second. She'll do anything to get what she wants. Lie to you, hurt you, rape you. So if you feel yourself getting sucked in by her, run. Run for your life. The voiceover during this sequence cuts between Serena approaching Fred in prison and June playing in the snow with Luke and Nicole. As the show often tries to draw parallels between June and Serena, it's clear we're meant to realize June's words aren't just about Serena, they're about herself. In episode 8, June joins a support group of Handmaid survivors, which include Moira and Emily. While Moira tries to steer the group away from only expressing rage, June takes control of the group and asks them why they can't be as angry as they feel. When the handmaids do in fact choose rage, as June suggests, and help her tear apart Fred, she drops the handmaids as soon as they help her accomplish her own vengeance, and is unwilling to help them enact their own. She also pushes Emily to confront Aunt Irene, despite Emily clearly saying she did not want to. June, of all people, should understand how violating it is to have someone dictate how you process trauma. After all, she resented Luke for doing the same thing. June scoffs at the idea that Aunt Irene could possibly be worse than Aunt Lydia, undermining Emily's experience by implying June knows better. One of the only moments of genuine softness we see from June in season 4 is at the Magdalene Academy with Nick and Holly. In his presence, June is unguarded and safe, even in her deeply flawed state. It's a stark contrast to her interactions with Luke, who not only urges her to move on from her trauma, but also appears visibly horrified after she kills Fred. Which leads us to season 5 June. Who the fuck knows? Because between her drawn-out death threats towards Serena and her going on a pointless mission to a bowling alley, which ends up killing Jaden, a young, sweet guardian, there's hardly a memorable scene of June's character development or which helps move the story forward. In season 6, we're teased with what seems like a turning point. We begin to see those closest to June confront her behavior. Nick says he's constantly putting himself in danger for her, while she admits it must be hellish to be in love with her. Luke is angry that June undercuts his carefully planned mission to bomb the commanders and seemingly forgets that he too is fighting for Hannah. Moira confronts June for acting as if hers is the only trauma that matters, and Rita asserts her own voice, refusing to let June speak for her in response to Serena. I assumed that there was a purpose of all these characters calling out June and bring about a moment of humility in her, but of course that's not the case. Instead, we're handed what might be the show's most absurd moral contortion yet, the so-called betrayal. And yes, it bears repeating, because the show seems to hope we forget the context. June is the one who put Nick in this impossible situation. But showrunner and writer Eric Tuchman insists she only betrayed the handmaids when Gilead threatened Hannah, as if that was the only mistake or selfish thing June has done. We're apparently meant to forget all other lives lost due to her actions. Former showrunner and writer Bruce Miller said that June's love almost saved Nick. Where is this love that he speaks of? I saw no love or forgiveness for the scared man who was backed into a corner and made a decision to save himself. A man who, we were told earlier this season, was raised by a difficult man, i.e. an abusive father. This feels like a transactional type of love on June's part towards Nick. At the end of episode 9, when June sees Nick board the plane, how exactly does she know he isn't there to protect her or executing a plan of his own to undermine the commanders? Even fans who argue that Nick only acts for June admit he's consistently done everything in his power to keep her safe, so why would this time be any different? Yalan Chang said in The Hollywood Reporter, Nick has done some bad things, and we haven't shown them, so it was convenient to forget. Yeah, it's convenient to forget things that were never actually shown. And Eric Tuchman said on Inside the Episode, we don't see 95% of what Nick does in Gilead. The writer's insistence on selling a narrative that they never bothered to build is not only manipulative, it's downright insulting. Instead, we watch June choose to move forward with a plan that eliminates her two closest allies in Gilead. Even if her personal feelings for Nick had completely vanished, keeping him in power would be the obvious strategic move. He's one of the few people with access to information on Hannah, and his wife Rose is friends with the Mackenzies. But once again, emotional impulsiveness trumps logic, and the writers ask us to accept that without question. Up until the very last episode, June maintains her lack of accountability, as I interpreted June's lines of Nick being dishonest and violent as June feeling so much guilt that she has to gaslight herself, rather than face that she killed Nick, the man she supposedly loved and her daughter's father. Otherwise, why would they show us June having fond memories of Nick? And now, Holly will grow up never knowing the love and concern her father tried to send her way because June never passed on those messages. Another layer of hypocrisy in June's arc is how she once lashed out at her mother, Holly, for prioritizing activism over being present with June, only to end her story by doing the very same thing to her own daughter. As our friend Melissa pointed out in one of our discussions, the show has reached a level of June centricism that is illogical. Everything happens because she has plans. If someone else has plans, it doesn't work. All the characters redeem themselves because of her or on her behalf. We understand the show is about June, but it's ridiculous. The showrunners told The Hollywood Reporter that this is not a show that needs a male savior. And fair. But it's also not a show that needs a female savior either. We get that June is the main character, but that doesn't mean she is the revolution. Expecting us to feel satisfied with her as this lone warrior against Gilead is not only reductive, it's absurd. Everyone in the story is flawed, and yes, June has endured unimaginable trauma, but acknowledging that doesn't mean we should stop evaluating the content of her character or the impact of her choices. Real revolutions don't depend on a single hero. They take shape when people unite around a common purpose and stand together against unjust systems.
Okay, well, that was so good.
Oh my God, Marigold. My favorite part was when you said emotional impulsiveness trumps logic.
Yeah,
That describes her so well.
Applause, definitely.
I also love you mentioning that this show doesn't need a female savior. I could not agree more. Like she never had to be in this savior role. And it was like a complaint I've always sort of had, is that they kind of tried to make her a superhero, and things finally start to succeed because June is involved. And it's like, I'm like, why couldn't she just continue to be an average woman like the rest of us? And I don't know, group efforts, teamwork, that's what kind of makes things successful. Maybe she can be the spirit or the driving force, but it doesn't have to be all because she's involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that she's inspirational to people, but it's become way too centered on her. And I think that separates it from reality a lot. And I was really glad that, thank you, Marigold, for pointing that out, because that was an excellent point to make.
Yes.
And like all of this is so much of what we've been saying lately, that as much as we want to continue liking June and rooting for her double standard and hypocrisy when it comes to Nick is just like so infuriating.
Oh my God.
And this lays it out so brilliantly. And then there's her selfishness just overall too. Like Marigold just pointed out, with her not helping the other women even to get their justice after they helped her in season 4, episode 10.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
And she's being selfish with Luke too, I think, because like we understand she's reverting back to her life before Gilead and trying to reclaim that. But she's also been keeping him captive to that hope when she could have broken away from him earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it would have hurt Luke, but it would have been better for him to have a chance to move on from her sooner, I think.
That's what I've always thought. I've always thought there was a cruelty in sticking around because her heart was torn and divided. And it just always seemed like, at least in the previous seasons, that she had fallen in love with Nick, and there just didn't seem to be the same connection with Luke anymore. And it just seemed like she was stringing him along just because she didn't want to be alone.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought that was selfish.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know, who knows what I would have done in that same situation, but I just feel like I would have hoped, watching June and Luke together, that both of them would be having these conversations, asking, what do you want now? You know, has anything changed for you? How do you feel? But they never really had those conversations.
Yeah, and earlier in season 6, because we kind of thought we saw where the arc was going with their characters and their relationship, I think I was really happy about that, actually. I was happy about the conversations they were having, because I thought I sort of understood that she was learning something from it, or she was doing some self-reflection, and he was too, and they were both like coming to terms with what their new relationship was going to be. But now that we know that it kind of landed at like a nothingness, it's one of the many big issues I have with the ending, because I can't really look back and respect or believe her anymore, even when it comes to him. Like, I just don't.
Yeah, when I think back at the first half of season 6, it just doesn't match the back half of season 6.
Yeah.
Because in the first half of season 6, we have that amazing episode 3, where it really seemed like this was an episode with Nick and June, where Nick was really getting a lot of his pain and honest feelings out, and June was hearing him. And it seemed like that was going somewhere as a resolution to the love triangle in a meaningful way, you know,
Yep.
to in a direction where June was actually going to make a choice. And obviously that didn't happen.
Yeah, so many different characters were having these really like heartfelt, emotional conversations that it was just like, oh, we're airing everything. Cool, that's great. This is what we've been waiting for.
Mhm.
And then it just completely fizzled out and meant almost nothing in the end. And
Yeah.
very disappointing.
Very disappointing.
Okay, so now we're going to hear a personal statement from Helen.
I wasn't an instant fan of the show. Knowing the source material, I took my time to enter that world again. But because of the execution was so brilliant, I stayed. I also stayed because I grew closer and closer to the protagonist. Her story is so believably human, relatable in one way, confusing in another, frustrating in yet another. Compelling to watch, compelling to empathize with, compelling to look back at myself and face some difficult parts of me. And it was not about the love story. It was about June. But with her, that love slipped through, and that other person eventually slipped through. It wasn't until late season 2 that I first gave the character of Nick my attention, and it was because of what he had become to June. A refuge, a place to breathe, someone who'd remember her when she was gone, and who did remember. Someone who cared, someone who understood her situation and because of that never asked for anything in return. Someone who accepted all parts of her, who saw her for who she was and loved her for exactly that. Is this ridiculous? I don't think so. Is this laughable? I don't think so. Did June feel that way? I don't think so. Yet the ending of that story was just that, in this one particular aspect. And I will only focus on this part, not because it's the only part I care about. There's a myriad of things that made many storylines and many parts of the show and its production compelling. I will not give a list. You can find it all in the podcast, in the hours of recordings. And a lot of those storylines ended in a satisfactory manner, whereas some did not. But I don't think my final pats on the back for the good parts will mean much anymore, or ever have. Equally, I don't think this comment means much, and it does seem futile to say these words here. But for the sake of putting a final dot at the end of my story with this show, of my faith and involvement with the show, I'm still going to do this. A closure of sorts. Coming back to what I said before, the ending of that part of the story seems a lot like someone wanted to put me into a corner, much like Belle did with Janine, because I did not see this specific part as ridiculous, or laughable, or dismissible. Because I believe that the heroine of the story, who has shown time and again that she doesn't give up on the people she loves, would give up on this one. More than that she would file him away together with her male abusers. Because I believe that it meant something that there was someone who had helped her carry herself through the worst of their life. I don't feel ashamed. I'm not going to stand in a corner and think about my behavior, or ponder if I was just naive. I am also not going to argue with a list of reasons or give examples of the many ways Nick has given to June, and how both of them, separately, deserve a better ending. Although I appreciate everyone who is doing exactly that. Thank you for all the receipts. I didn't expect a beach in Hawaii or museum hopping in Paris, but I also didn't expect an ending that is so unjust to the heroine of the story. I didn't expect June's ingratitude and inaction when faced with the opportunity to, in return, and for once, save Nick's actual life. When it was him breaking, when it was him desperate for a hand, when it was him losing perspective and making a mistake. When it was his turn to get the help that he himself had offered June countless times. When he required something that June had given freely to others, and even extended to her rapist. That is her humanity, her grace, her support. And I will wonder if that wasn't a more ruthless betrayal. Of Nick, of course, but also of herself. Because I didn't expect that June would choose to walk back into the confinements of outside expectations. That she would give in to the judgment, that she would choose her traumas over what it is that she wants or needs. That she will let someone she claims she loves, and who loves her for her, die, instead of confronting those parts of herself that she's afraid of, that she's ashamed of. That she would choose this loophole to clump up Nick with, quote-unquote, the rest of them, to alleviate her guilt while simultaneously keeping up her image in the eyes of the people who claim to love her, but bury her under her own expectations. What I will think of is the source material. I will think of its message and of what message the show's ending is trying to convey, of how far apart they land, of those original characters, their intended role and their version in the show, of their different histories and the different paths that had led them to that Waterford house and above the garage. I will think about how for a while they were the light in each other's lives, something that should have been consequential and transformative, how this shouldn't have been just nothing. I will think about how I've connected with some parts of June and admired parts of her, and how in some ways I've also connected with parts of Nick and admired parts of him. I will not going to give a list. I'm going to quote something instead. This season is a love letter to the fans, end quote. And in some ways it was, or it was intended as that. I could see that. So I read through that letter and I believed its intentions till the very end. But then the author signed it not with the customary love you. They used a different 4-letter word, one I have not expected to find in a love letter. And it's hard not to seek one last parallel here. A parallel between this specific part of the show and this specific part of the show's supporters.
Thank you so much for everything you said, Helen.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. I think June's empathy was such a huge part of her character, and her showing that to everyone but the person who did the absolute most for her throughout the series, it just feels so disheartening.
Yeah, agreed. Right there with you.
Yeah. I think a lot of us can relate to what Helen said, for sure, and feel that personally.
Absolutely.
Or feel that character change in June.
Yeah, and how that's affected our perception of her character in retrospect. It's affected our perception on the relationship, on the show as a whole. So I really, really appreciate everything she said.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so now we're going to hear a personal statement from Tina.
I have a magnet on my refrigerator. It says, I mourn the death of fictional characters. A friend gave it to me years ago, and I've always loved it because it's true. It speaks to how deeply we connect with stories and characters. Some may see that as a weakness, but I never have. To me, it's a strength, because caring, truly caring, even about fictional people, means you have the capacity for empathy and compassion. It's what makes us human, right? So the magnet. While I obviously never wanted to think of it in the context of Nick, now I have to. And I found myself dealing with this loss in a way that I've been unable to shake, because unlike other fictional losses, this one feels different. With most characters, I cry, I process, I move on. But with Nick, I can't seem to. I feel like I'm stuck, cycling repeatedly through anger, sadness, confusion, trying to make sense of what feels like a senseless death. And so because this feels so different, I've been asking myself why. And first, I think the issue is I'm trying to make sense of something that is, at its core, nonsensical. Ultimately, Nick's death, as it happened, was a cheap plot device that served no narrative purpose other than manufactured drama. It was meant to hurt and nothing else. But more importantly, what I realized is I'm not just mourning him, I'm mourning what he represented. Because for me, and many others, Nick was comfort. He was hope. Max Minghella once described Nick and June's relationship as like a rose in an apocalyptic scenario, and he was right. Because Nick was a light in the darkness and an escape, not just for June, but for me too. I've touched on this before on the podcast, but about a year after I first started watching The Handmaid's Tale, my family experienced a tragic, sudden, and very public loss. It was everywhere, on the news, social media, text messages, phone calls. There was no peace to be found. It was incredibly overwhelming, bleak, and it truly felt inescapable. And in that darkness, strangely enough, I found solace in The Handmaid's Tale. But not just the show, it was Nick. When I couldn't take any more bad news, I'd retreat to my room, turn on my TV, and watch and rewatch all of the scenes that we had at the time of Nick comforting June. Watching him be that steady, comforting presence for her was exactly what I needed at the time. It gave me something nothing else could: escape and peace. Watching Nick be that constant for June was the one thing I could continually come back to over the last decade as my safe space when the real world was awful and unforgiving, as it so often is now. And that is the core of why his death has hit me so hard. I'm not just grieving a character, I'm grieving the loss of a safe space, a comfort character, something that helped me navigate some incredibly dark days. And now I can never look at this show the same way again. Knowing how his story ends, so unceremoniously and void of empathy or compassion, both from the woman who claimed to love him and from the people who were responsible for his fate, feels like a betrayal. And what I want to say to anyone listening who may have also considered Nick a comfort character is that you are not alone in your hurt. And you were not wrong to have loved Nick, to get attached to him, mourn his death, or be upset at the attempted 11th hour recharacterization of Nick to someone he wasn't. Because here's the truth. To the people who worked on this show, the ones making the storytelling decisions, it was just that, work. Just another job, another project to finish and move on from. They will forget, in all likelihood, about the decisions they made for Nick. But I won't. I won't ever forget how Nick's story ended. Because of that, I'll never be able to draw comfort from this show ever again. The loss of that safe space is something else I'll have to carry. Something that I suspect many of you will carry as well. And their failure to see the impact assassinating Nick's character, literally and figuratively, had on real people, on us, shows a profound lack of empathy and compassion for their audience. Additionally, the way they have continued to double down on their inconsistent and poor storytelling in interviews and tried to reduce Nick to just another malevolent commander, to gaslight us into believing Nick was spending 95% of his time being a good old boy in Gilead, is tone-deaf at best and cruel at worst. It is a disservice to Nick's legacy, to The Handmaid's Tale, and to all of us who stayed loyal to the story, hoping Nick might one day find some semblance of peace or contentment, whether with June or without her. With all that said, if no one else in the show's orbit will remember Nick fondly, I will, because that's what he deserves, and so do we. We turned to Nick when we needed him. Now, when he needs us to make sure he's remembered for the character he always was, that's what I'll do. And I guess, in a way, this is how we push back. The show wants us to remember him as a traitor and a Gilead loyalist, wants his history to be rewritten as someone who is violent and dishonest, June's words, not mine. And ultimately, I assume, someone not worthy of being remembered fondly, if at all. But that's not who he was. So what will I remember? I'm going to remember the Nick I watched for nearly a decade. Someone who was good, kind, brave, funnily enough, also June's words. Someone who was patient, he was understanding, he was gentle. Someone who risked everything, including his life, again and again to help June, even when she couldn't, or wouldn't, do the same for him. Someone who, in his last moments of existence, was still concerned about the well-being of the woman he loved, not knowing she had just sentenced him to death. Someone who loved so deeply and unconditionally, it was ultimately his downfall. And this is not to say he was perfect. He wasn't. He was human, flawed, like the rest of us. But in death, we often like to remember a person's most admirable traits, and these were Nick's. And above all else, even through the mistakes, he always tried to do right by the people he loved. And those are the things about Nick that we will remember and carry with us.
Thank you, Tina, for that. That was great.
It broke my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry that you were going through such a hard time, but that's such a moving representation of what drew you to his character, because there's so many misconceptions about why we like his character, why it means so much to us. And that is just, it's beautiful and heartbreaking that it was a source of comfort. And unfortunately now it's gone.
Yeah. I think, like she said too, it's kind of a mirror to our own traumatic or dark experiences in the real world, like the show is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously what they go through in The Handmaid's Tale is worse than a lot of us will ever experience, but we can sort of use, or we have maybe thought of Nick and June and Nick and that comfort and kindness as like an antidote. It's like a media escape
Yeah.
that helps it to feel like maybe it's possible to find relief from those things in our real lives too.
Mm-hmm.
I think Tina touched on that.
And hope.
Yeah.
It would always give us hope as well.
Mm-hmm. So the message feels a lot more dark and brutal and bleak now with the way it's ended.
And it was already a dark and brutal and bleak show.
Right.
And we always called them the light.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very unfortunate. This is where we're at now.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about Nick's background and his character.
Yeah. So we are introduced to Nick via June's voiceover in episode 1. And he was introduced to us as low status, and he was shoveling gravel or dirt. So clearly not high up within Gilead and Sons of Jacob. And then later on in season 1, we get a flashback of him in episode 8, where he looks to be about maybe like 19 or 20 years old. Nick was from Michigan, and he was struggling to find a job in the middle of a recession. And he is at like a job agency, and he's working with Price to try to find a job. And something that I kind of took note of during that scene was that he really had like no ego about finding a job. He said, I'll do retail, I'll take a job in Ann Arbor. He was just very desperate, very down on his luck. And then we see Price taking him to a diner, and we learn in that scene that Nick has a father and a brother, and we learn that Nick's father and the brother, it sounds like, worked at a steelworks. It closed, and we learn that the reason why Nick is unable to keep a job is because he's trying to help his alcoholic brother. And when Price, hears this, he really tries to, empathize and show care for Nick. He says it's hard to keep a job when you're trying to take care of your family, and that I think he calls Nick a good soul. And that's when he kind of starts to lure Nick into Sons of Jacob. But during the scene, Price, he quotes, when I say air quotes, a Bible verse, and Nick seems knowledgeable enough to know that Price's line is not in the Bible. So my thinking, he either has some religious background or he's savvy enough to know
that, you know, certain groups use religion to kind of twist their agenda. So, and in that scene, I've always interpreted as like the only reason why Nick wanted to become involved in the Sons of Jacob is when Price mentions a job. And I don't really see any like true belief in it.
Yeah. Price said he's like a head of a group.
Overseeing a chapter.
Yeah. And he can come to the meetings if he wants. And maybe there's a job in it, like a flexible job, which is very important for Nick, that he can like, you know, that he does not have to work 9 to 5 or something, that he can like still take care of his brother and especially his brother and also of his dad.
Yeah. I think the next information that we have on his family is not until season 6, right?
Yeah, there's a big gap in us learning about
5-season drought.
Yeah. So then we learn in season 6, episode 2, that Wharton describes Nick's dad as a difficult man, and Nick kind of scoffs and says that's one way to put it. So I interpreted that as maybe he was potentially abusive. And then he also brings up his mom, and his mom worked at a diner, which Nick seems to like defend his mom when Wharton says, oh, she works outside of the house when she could have been, you know, feeding her family.
Didn't Nick also say that she liked to work in the diner? So
yeah,
which kind of indicates that she was either very independent or she wanted to get a little away from the potentially abusive husband, which is, well, not so nice if you leave your kids with said husband, as we then learn later that she left the family when he was 11.
Yeah, which we find that out in the flashback in season 6, episode 6, when he talks about her.
Exactly. But also the other question is, like, I mean, he said she liked that she worked there, but my question is also, maybe they were like kind of that poor that both parents had to work certain hours, like to have ends meet.
To make ends meet,
Yeah, I always got that impression. Like, something I was thinking about too is like, out of all of the main characters on the show, I really think that Nick's probably the only one who's come from more of that maybe like lower working class kind of family, because it seemed like, I mean, obviously June, Luke, Moira, they were all educated or, you know, coming from like stronger family backgrounds, whereas Nick is the only one, I think, out of the main characters that we've seen to kind of come from this kind of economical status and kind of a broken home.
Yeah, I know Scarlett had mentioned too that she thought it was an important point about the way that Nick seems to respect his mother in the way he talks about her, even though she left the family.
I think I said that at one point too, that it's interesting that he never speaks ill about her, like despite having been abandoned by her, like, and he's still treating women with respect, like every woman. Like when he was a driver and Serena was above him, like status wise, it was okay, of course, but like he also treated Rita and Beth and never disrespectfly. He was acting cold sometimes, okay, but he never diminished them or belittled them or any kind of way, which is interesting, coming from that background, which kind of also highlights his morals, I think, and his moral compass, especially, I think.
Yes.
And I feel like Nick, while he obviously got lured into the Sons of Jacob, I feel like he might not be educated, but I feel like he was smart enough to kind of see through some of the agenda a little bit. I mean, obviously cults, I was listening to the earlier Nick character episode today, but like obviously cults, like I think Scarlett said, cults don't lure you in by saying like, hey, we're gonna you know, round up all the fertile women and then we're gonna impregnate them.
Which actually was not even necessarily in place at that time either, because this was pretty
No.
early in the process of.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was after the takeover. I mean, we have the scene. Was it the same episode? I think so, right?
Yeah.
Later on when he's in the car. Right, exactly.
When Commander Guthrie at that point, already Commander Guthrie at that point came up with this, oh yeah, let's round up the women.
Right.
Thing.
Yeah. And Nick looked horrified when he said that.
For sure, yeah. Through his eyes in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for being that big ass soldier, or no, like the architect of Gilead, he's driving around those guys.
Large air quotes around that.
Yeah. I know when people say that, I'm like, okay, so specifically with that scene, like this was post takeover because they mentioned Guthrie taking like New York or something like that. So Nick was way far into it before he learned like the Sons of Jacob and Gilead's like really true intentions. So people saying that like, you know, he's always been this way or he's always been a part of Gilead, I find that hard to agree with. So, and I think like we give people a lot more grace that are in like cults and who like knowingly enter these cults who have these ridiculous beliefs. But here is this young boy, almost teenage boy, maybe, you know, young adult who gets lured into this cult because he's desperate for a job. And I feel like a lot of fans forget that about Nick. So it's just something that we should give him some grace with that, I think.
Yeah, I also think it's important to point out, in my opinion at least, and you guys can tell me if you disagree with this, but he seems like extremely cynical out of the gate, like as an 18 or 19-year-old, like has seen some bad times. Like you just like, there's just this darkness to him, I think. And I just don't think in that scene where Price is introducing the idea of the job in the diner, that there was any moment during that conversation where Nick was buying any of the like religious, or maybe we don't even say religious, but just the part of the conversation that was about like, oh, the culty part of the conversation.
Yeah.
He just wasn't. I mean, and I had an experience with a friend being offered a job once that was pretty clearly they wanted you into a religious movement to take the job, and were kind of pressuring. Not pressuring, actually, that's the wrong word. They were kind of actually very kindly and politely offering materials about it. And, you know, at the time he wasn't desperate for work. I mean, he had the luxury of being able to continue looking for other jobs, but had he been in a situation, I mean, he was 19, same age. Had he been in a situation where, you know, couldn't pay rent, I wouldn't have been surprised. And I could see myself doing the same thing actually, in taking a job like that, because you think like, oh, well, that's over there. They're like doing their whole weird thing, and I'll just ignore it and show up to church and take my paycheck, you know? So like I can see very clearly how in that initial moment of like, I just really need a job, I'll just take it, it'll be fine. And the rate at which things escalated in Gilead too, in this story.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I feel like also people saying that Nick could have gotten out of Gilead, like he didn't have, at that point, I feel like he was probably felt like he was stuck. He was probably felt like it was impossible for him to get out, because like that's what cults do. They tend to isolate you. But I mean, sadly to begin with, Nick was pretty isolated to begin with because he didn't have family to support him. He didn't have financial means. So like, who knows? Obviously, I don't know this, but what if Canada, when this was starting to happen, was like, okay, you can buy yourself, you know, Canadian citizenship for certain people. Like, there's no way out for Nick, who's, you know, struggling to hold down a job. So
yeah,
I think it would have been way, way harder for him than like, say, June and Luke, who had good jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even just to move his whole family, even if we're not talking about actually buying a citizenship, or, you know, like just to physically uproot his whole family and move them somewhere would have probably seemed impossible to a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
To take that responsibility on.
Well, a thing I can't really relate to is because I'm not American. So I don't have any clue about your, like, not a lot of any information about your social systems, because I'm German and we have like a safety net, which is pretty big, but we also have high taxes. So, you know, so this is one thing I cannot really comment on, like how much of a dire situation it was for Nick.
Yeah.
Like basically be the only breadwinner for like 3 adults at that point, because like, I mean, we have established that his dad has like quarter of a pension, and well, Josh is not coming home and is a drunk.
His brother.
Like just his brother. So he was the only one who, well, financially was actually needing a job to, well,
take care of them.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, I have been fortunate to never have been as desperate as I imagined that his family was, but I grew up lower middle class, probably in that neighborhood, and getting assistance is quite complicated. And I mean, I can't comment on the specific things either because we never went through it. But I mean, like my mom, we lived in Section 8 housing. So like we had like that benefit, which basically just means you get cheaper rent and they control a lot of what you can do. Like we had apartment inspections. They'd come and check to see how clean we were keeping the place and stuff like that to get the assistance. But I know like a lot of things it's a very arduous process that's very ongoing, with constantly needing to present evidence to get help. And I mean, I have a friend who's on disability and it's like a part-time job for her to keep getting help.
Yeah.
And our cost of living, I mean, is absolutely through the roof. I mean, everywhere, I guess, but it's very difficult for one person to support a household, or more than one person, you know?
Yeah, sure. And it seemed like in that Nick flashback scene, like, yeah, he was hurting, but it looked like everybody was hurting, or a lot of people were hurting around him. So the resources are even stretched even thinner. So I'm assuming he's from Detroit, and Detroit is known as for being a city that had a lot of manufacturing and a lot of plants closing and a lot of economic hardship. So
yeah, in season 4, Tuello has the board of information about Nick, and it says born in Detroit on there. So we have that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also presented as like, because we see him in this job counseling billing, and there are a lot of people waiting. Like one gets really, really angry just because Nick's talking like a minute with Price there, who's the counselor, you know?
There's economic crisis happening because of everything.
It's a real economic crisis already happening. I mean, except for the fertility crisis, there's also an economic crisis. And we also heard from like later from Nick that his brother and his father lost their jobs. So which underlines the crisis, I think, like the notion of there's real economic crisis going on.
Yeah.
So Kira Snyder, who wrote the episode 108 Jezebels with Nick's flashback, she had replied to one of us on Twitter about how the cult parallels were very well noted in this episode, and the writers were interested how everyday people get pulled into movements like Gilead, especially someone with a good heart, a man with a good heart. So those are words straight from one of the writers. So
yes,
which is now a great segue to what I want to say now. Yeah. But thank you for reminding us of this quote, or like the message from Kira Snyder we got, who wrote this episode, because I wanted to comment on the fact that how these kind of movements or cults or, you know, parties draw in people who are desperate a little, and historically, and to stay within the Nazi rhetoric, they now oftentimes used to make their point. Well, since I'm German, I'm obviously particularly thinking about the NSDAP in the 1930s. So organizations and movements like this target poor, desperate people mostly, and offer them a quick solution, mainly a job, like with Nick, or at least a perspective or a sense of belonging. And in the case of the NSDAP, there were also perfect circumstances going on for them to get popular, and like the SOJ did within Gilead. First, in 1929, the Great Depression, that left the whole world with a declining economy, what we just commented on, like people losing their jobs, stuff like this. And this is exactly where Nick is coming from. He desperately needed that job. And as we can also see in the flashback in 108, there are many people waiting in this job counseling center. So uncertainty and fear for economic safety is also something we're facing worldwide today too. Like this year, within like the recent maybe 4 years since the COVID-19 pandemic started, I think it's like really, really getting sadly in this kind of direction again, which is something we need to kind of also like bear in mind, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So we will not hopefully end up within these kind of situations with like real life Gilead or former Nazi Germany.
Yeah, inflation rates have been, so I was looking at that and it's crazy.
Yeah.
The percentages, how much it's increased over the last 3-4 years.
Definitely. Like my father has still a 1 million mark bill from 1928 or something, or 23. And it was not enough to even buy an egg.
Whoa.
Like it's like, yeah, because it just printed money. So inflation like got higher and higher and higher. And so like an egg cost like 10 million mark, and you just had like 1 million mark. It's just like a number printed on a piece of paper, basically.
Wow.
So it had no this inflation, like if you just continue printing money and there's no regulation and anything, it's just like the currency will lose its value, basically. So
right.
Yeah. Anyways, and the second factor can be found within family structures itself, as we also kind of started to point out. So many young men join these movements because they seek guidance, stability, and people they look up to, especially role models. For instance, many boys and young men lost their fathers in World War I, because I'm still like kind of comparing it to NSDAP and German movement, and were drawn to charismatic leaders and promising propaganda. Much like how Nick was also missing a reliable father figure to guide him until he latched onto Price, and then also later Lawrence, I would say.
Yeah, I think, Nick says to Wharton, like, he's never been confused about that. I don't think, I think Max always says that Nick is not this, like, intelligent person, or not an educated person, but I've always found him to be very, like, smart and maybe perceptive, or, like, self-aware, maybe.
Kind of savvy. I think he said that in our interview, too.
Yeah. So... yeah, I don't think he's ever been confused about that, but
even, I guess I can see how even if you aren't confused about that and you do kind of recognize it, he's still someone that has no one that is, maybe it gives him some purpose and stability to feel protected in some way by these people, or to feel like, it's not really that he's looking up to them. It's like a little that, I guess, but...
well, like, he basically has nobody, so, like...
right.
I feel like he's just looking for some sort of connection, even if it is, a commander within Gilead.
Mm-hmm.
So...
I do think that coming from a place of some level of poverty and a complete lack of instability within his family, like, anything else would seem like worth rolling the dice for, in a way. Like, okay, whatever this country is doing, whatever the government's doing, is clearly not helping me. So
yeah,
I can just see him being a little bit like, I don't know, like, this guy's offering me a job and let's just see what he has to say. And
yeah, definitely 100%.
Maybe he's got some kind of morals because he seems to care about me, and he's here taking the time to listen to me, and with Price. And
I feel like the direction that they took with Nick, it makes me think that they wanted to draw parallels between Nick and, like, incel culture now. And I don't think it's a good comparison.
You mean in the recent seasons, or?
I think, recent. Like, I feel like they're trying to show that, like, because he didn't leave this regime, like, he should be responsible for it, and, like, consequences of your actions kind of thing.
Which is completely forgetting what Gilead is. Like, it's completely separate from...
No, this is, like, the one thing that, like, infuriates me, like, a lot, that it deviated so much from the atrocities of this system in Gilead, you know. It's like, because they presented everything so easily, like they can go in, they can go out. It's like there are no consequences, nobody's dying, nobody's hanged, or like you know, there are no consequences anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 seasons, it was like breathe wrong and you're on the wall. Like,
yeah, exactly. And this is like what drew me into this show, and like this is what I wanted to explore, how like everyday people have to navigate this kind of situation.
Yeah, it's something that they have no training in, no idea how to navigate, and also that you can't trust anyone. You can't like from every angle. Yeah, there's nothing but oppression happening, and it's
exactly
just that's not how it feels anymore.
No, and this is where I lost my interest.
Yeah. So just going back to the education piece that Katie was speaking on, I think you had some more comments on that, Julia.
Yeah, it's like I would just agree with Katie that the fact he's lacking higher education, like a college degree, which we now found out in 606 flashback with June, when they're cuddled up in Nick's apartment above the garage, which is also interesting because he told June that his mother was always eager that he pursue a college degree, but he didn't. And the fact that he never did, because obviously, as we know, for the 500th time, know that he needed to care of his family after she left.
Not to mention how absolutely outrageously expensive college is in America.
Great that you mentioned that. So he feels like that he's lacking in that department, but I am 100% that he's like at least the street smartness. He has an understanding how things are working, because he was let down by the system, by systems, by things many times over, but they still kind of present him as like kind of a poster boy of a victim of these kind of groups, like a desperate, easily gullible, easily gaslit, leadership searching individual, which he in the end isn't really like, or he was never this person, but he just, well, needed to be this person because he was desperately looking for money.
Yeah, Megan had a comment on this that I'll just read. Just speaking on the way that they ended his character after setting all of this up that we've just been discussing. She said, the show punished the kid who needed a lifeline and was manipulated and lured into the sons of Jacob based on hope for a better future more than those who created it. I guess the takeaway here is make sure you're rich and powerful instead of young and poor, because the rich and powerful are the only ones worthy of being rewarded and forgiven, which is pretty,
sadly accurate with the end, with who got redeemed and who didn't, and compared to the actions some of those characters committed versus the actions others did.
Mm-hmm. It's sadly accurate, and it's a very depressing message to send, which we will be getting into in depth shortly. There was just one more quote from Helen in our group, kind of along the lines of what Megan said. She basically is just talking about how, Nick eventually did see through the system. After the first offer died, he questioned it all. He tried to help. He stayed out of trouble. He stayed out of the spotlight. And because he did trust the system once, it effectively blocked his way out. He can't leave because he once trusted a man in a job center who used his situation, his family history. In a show like that, I was absolutely sure it would mean something. The story's on the very human and relatable level.
I still will never understand why they gave us more of his backstory.
Exactly.
To make us feel like empathy for him and then kill him in the way that they did.
There's also something, Rachel, actually you said about this, was that, there was a responsibility to the original vision of the books that Margaret Atwood intended for this to be, which I think aligns with what we've been talking about here. And I think, she has confirmed that in multiple places on podcasts and in her Twitter, that all people in a totalitarian regime are oppressed except those at the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nick's never been at the top, even at the end of the show. So he's been taken advantage of, lied to, and recruited. And, that was her original intent in the Handmaid's Tale novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the one portion when it was written out, like that she wrote the excerpt or something of the story in West Germany while it was still divided, but she visited the East, like the socialism part, and then she decided to change the story completely, and I was like, oh my god, yeah, I can relate to that because like I was talking about this episode 5 recording about like my parents grew up in GDR. Like I can completely relate to that feeling because this is what my parents told me growing up, you know, this is how it was, even though it was not okay. They went to prison and they were not shot or like, you know, died or whatever. It was not that harsh, but you still could not trust anybody. It's like this, it was an environment of mistrust you grew up in. And this is sad. Like if you cannot even trust your own family members.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, reminding us of that.
So one of the things that we've heard a lot about in the press by writers and showrunners and Moss herself is that Nick actively and willingly has chosen Gilead all the time. So he chooses to stay in Gilead and he doesn't want to leave. That he has the choice to leave anytime he pleases. But one of the things that we have seen and we've been shown in the show and is also backed by the book is that it's not really that easy to just leave, but also that Nick at the beginning is so low status that he does not have a choice in how he conducts his life. He gets married to a child against his own will, which he's devastated by because he does not want to get married and he doesn't want to get married to a 50-year-old. He also refuses to sleep with her, which is mandated by law in Gilead. He says to June, after marrying Eden in episode 6 of season 2, you know I didn't have a choice, because he is a low status no one, not the creator of Gilead that they've tried to portray him to be this last season. He also says in episode 6 of season 1, June says to him, if they find us together, I'm going to be sent to the colonies. You're an eye, you're untouchable. And he says to that, that's not true, which is also backed up by the book. And I do have the quote, which I can read later. She also says they don't rape you, do they? But we know he's been forced to have sex with a child, a 15-year-old, which he doesn't want to do. He hates it so much that he then tries to be reassigned and he tries to speak to Price so he can be sent somewhere else. He even says, I don't want if you send me to the front. So he would rather die than keep sleeping with Eden. One of the points I wanted to make also, which I do speak about that later, is that a lot of people have complained that he could have reported Fred for sexually abusing June outside the ceremony.
He could have. I have a point on that I can add.
Yeah, and he actually does that whole thing about him being reassigned. He says, like, is there any problem with Eden? And he's like, no, there's nothing to do with her. There's a lot I haven't told you about him, Fred. So I think he was willing to report him then, but then my whole point is that you can't really report household commander because then the whole household gets killed, which kind of is backed up by what happened with Cushing.
Yeah, my point was people always say that Serena had no power when she forced Nick and June to sleep together the first time, that he could have reported them then. My point has always been, if you see the flashback when he's talking to Price and Guthrie gets arrested, the line says his two Marthas verified it and he was skimming from the budget.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just because he was having sex with a handmaid.
Yeah.
But also with Putnam, you know, Putnam also gets punished. You know, we see a commander getting punished, but Janine made this a public spectacle. Everybody in Gilead saw what was happening with Janine, and Naomi also pushed for Putnam to get punished. So I don't think it was something that an I could have just said. He needed backup in order. So what was he supposed to do? Oh, Serena forced me. Fred and Serena would have just gotten together and said that Nick had slept with her on her own, and he would have died. Like, he didn't have that power when he was just a guardian or an eye. Like, just because you're an eye doesn't mean that you can go be tattling tales with people like that.
Yeah.
Well, the evidence is pretty clear that part of what Nick's doing is gathering things that he can build a case on. So you're not going to just report impulsively about one thing because it's not going to accomplish the end goal of being able to actually like deliver a 1-2 punch or whatever to someone. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's got to keep those those pieces of blackmail to use at the right time when it's going to be the most effective. And I think that he's been really clever with that, actually, with some of the other things he's done that we've been talking about and that we've seen in the show. Yeah. So every time Fred is with June, you can see how much he wants to he wants to report him and he wants to stop it.
It's also not something that didn't happen before, because the first handmaid killed herself. Serena knew what Fred was doing. Serena could have reported Fred as well.
Yep.
And they didn't, because they're powerful commanders. They're going to find ways to cover themselves. So it's not as easy as people would like to think that it is.
Yeah.
For sure.
I've got a quote from the book, so I'm going to read it now.
Yeah.
The penalties for unauthorized sexual activity with a handmaid were severe, nor would his status as an eye necessarily protect him, which means that he can't just do whatever he wants.
Yeah, and I think in the very first episode of the show, they're killing a guardian for sleeping with a handmaid.
It's one of the what are they called?
Participations, yeah.
I think in the book,
yeah.
He's Mayday.
You're gonna
Yeah,
say
he's
it,
Mayday.
Yeah, he is Mayday, yeah.
Seems like that's there intentionally to show us that it's not just like that the guardians and the eyes and stuff are not above the law, that they're still going to be punished.
Season 1 and 2, they tried, yeah, exactly, yeah. They do, and again, because sticking to the book, those 2 seasons are, you know, they're a lot more
faithful. They're
following the book narrative, whereas after season 3 is free for all, and obviously they made these choices. So to carry on with that, it was that staying in Gilead is not so much a choice, but a reality for him. He doesn't have a choice. He doesn't get what he wants. I can't have what I want, is what he says to Rita in episode 7 of the last season. We know he wants to leave. He says it pretty much every single season. In season 1, he says, I should have driven away with you, after she's been interrogated by one of the eyes for her relationship with Glenn. That's the ice scene.
Oh, the ice scene, yeah.
Yeah.
In her room.
Yeah. And they're not even together at that point.
Right.
He's not in love with her, but that's already something that is in his mind, on his mind, because he doesn't want her to end up like the first Offred did. Because he's a good human being, not just because he's in love with her. He also says in season 2, episode 6, we should just run away somewhere. That's when he's just been married to Eden, and she's pregnant with the child, with Nicole, and she's just collapsed the night before. And in season 4, episode 9, he says, I should have driven away with you. So the reason why he doesn't is because he can't. It's a pipe dream. Sure, they could have tried, and they could have maybe got quite far, but we should not forget that it's very, very difficult. And when he did try to escape or get her out in season 2 with Mayday, they needed 3 different people to drive from different places. They weren't connected to each other. They didn't know the names. They didn't know who the other person was, because that's how their network works. She had to stay hidden for weeks. Is it a couple of months?
2 months, I think.
2 months, yeah, that's what I thought. And even then, they still track her down. And if we remember, the Guardian that's on the plane with her, he's not even trying to be heroic. He's just trying to escape because he's scared and he doesn't want to stay in Gilead anymore. He's just like Nick. And guess what happens? He gets killed trying to get away.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's like, well, a couple of things. Nick doesn't even know when they're moving June, which he says. They don't tell me anything. I don't know. But also, if he tried to escape with her, I think it would endanger her too more, because
he'd be missing.
Right. He'd be missing and he wouldn't be able to cover for her, really. I just think, yeah, the chances of them both just getting in a car and driving to the border and making it is like basically not existent, at least in the way that Gilead operates in the original seasons and in the book.
Yeah.
To that, what you're saying, Lawrence tried to leave with Eleanor in season 3, and obviously Lawrence was a bigger commander than Nick was in season 3, and he couldn't. So it's like the show was pretty good about showing how hard it was to leave Gilead until probably the last 2 seasons. And then it just became like, oh, everybody can go in and out of Gilead. So it kind of like watered down that feeling. And maybe that's why people think that they could leave whenever they wanted to.
It's also really drilled by the writers this season. They keep saying that this is a choice that he actively decides to have, that he could just leave. Twella said it last season as well. And it doesn't seem right with what we have and the information that we know of Gilead and the way, as you said, that it operates. I remember when there used to be like a helicopters literally every time there was anything happening. Like when she escaped, you can hear the helicopters from the Boston Globe. You can see them and hear them when Emily escapes with Nicole. It happens when after the bombing of the new Rachel and Leah Center, like anytime there's anything, any sort of event, they get everybody out looking for these people that are trying to escape or try to rebel.
And a lot of people die after that bombing was when Cushing was going around killing whole households, thinking that they might have been attached to that.
Yeah.
So it's not like, there's a lot of repercussions.
And again, if they were to do that and they got caught, Rita would have been killed too. Like the whole household, innocent people would get killed too. It's not just Fred and Serena, it's the whole household.
So Rachel had brought up a good point about Tuello kind of targeting Nick to use as a spy for him. So the board that Tuello has in his office when he's speaking to June in season 4, where he's got the Waterfords and then he's got Nick there. It's kind of like the whole household on the board together. There's a post-it note over Nick's section that says possible ally, but it has like possible ally question mark. So I think Tuello is already thinking of that. I don't know where he's getting that from. I don't know if June said something to him, but it seems like even back mid-season 4, he was considering like going to Nick.
He must have had information about who Nick was and his relation to the son of Jacobs, and he must have known everything he's done. Like that line Serena uses back in season 3, where we wouldn't be here without him. He must have known all his involvement, and he still thought that he could be a possible ally.
Right.
So again, doesn't add up.
Which you can see. I mean, from what they've shown us in the show, you see how he was coerced. I mean, that's season 1, episode 8, and how
it's canon. We've seen how he joins the Sons of Jacobs. It's not because he believes in Gilead. It's not because he wants to enslave women and take the babies away. That's not why he joins. He's desperate.
Yeah, I just don't think that the Sons of Jacob, when they were doing chapters to recruit people, I just don't think that they were going around like, hey, we're going to kidnap babies and we're going to enslave women that are fertile. I think those ideas were for the top commanders. I mean, I can see that they were obviously a conservative group. And because of what was going on in the story, in the world, and the fertility crisis, why people latch onto that to change, quote unquote, the world. But nobody knew that that's exactly how it was going to end. So I don't think that Nick was privy to that information until much later, after the takeover had happened, until pretty much Gilead was in place. So we do hear him when they talk about the handmaid system, but I think also, what was he supposed to do when he heard it?
Yeah.
Like form a coup? I mean, I know they're trying to make us believe that he was a sole creator of Gilead, but then my point again to his character is, if he would have been such an instrumental part of Gilead's creation, he would have still be a military person. He wouldn't be a driver.
No.
Like, that doesn't track.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, like you can't tell me one thing after 6 seasons of seeing this character, and I understand what they're trying to sell me now. Oh, we never saw it, and we're going to stick to the ambiguity of the character. But the same way that you're telling me, oh, well, he's a commander. He wasn't always a commander. There's a reason why he became a commander, and he's been doing things to go up the ranks that we never get to see. The same way that we didn't get to see him doing these evil things, he could have been doing good things. And unfortunately, a lot of people expected this to go as the book, because there was no indication that they're going to deviate from the book. And that's in that character. Lawrence is a character that wasn't in the book, so I understand that they could have done anything with him. Luke was also a character that died in the book, so I understand you could expand. But Nick was in both books, and in both books, it was determined that he was Mayday resistance. And someone that's playing both sides is going to do things that make you believe that he is a bad guy, because that's the way that you gain trust with the bad guys in order to infiltrate from the inside.
Yeah, which we'll definitely cover a lot more of the book canon. We'll go into detail about that part too. I did want to read something that Rachel said here in our group about the Tuello board. She said, Tuello knew everything on that board. He probably knows more about Nick's background than anyone. He was able to read Nick's Facebook post on the SOJ page, that's Sons of Jacob page. If he had sniffed out a true allegiance to Sons of Jacob and Gilead in him, he wouldn't have bothered. But he saw Nick as someone he could trust on the inside. And the lines he says to Nick in season 5, episode 10, too, if it were up to me, I'd take you at your word. Tuello says that to Nick. And he also says, I'd say you're an honorable man. So why would Tuello be this confident if all Nick had done was lead a violent and dishonest life, as we're supposed to now buy from the finale of the series? So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So this is something that Helen pointed out, following up with the Tuello's murder board. That's what she calls him. that Nick got recruited in 2012. That's what it says on the board. And that would have made him 18 or 19 years old, so a teenager that knew nothing but struggle in his life. He didn't have opportunities like June to be brought up by a liberal and fierce mother in a metropolitan city like Boston. And he didn't go to college, he wasn't educated, and he didn't even have an opportunity to live his life as a self-sufficient adult.
Yeah, and she points out, like, we believe the show would be true to reality, meaning that a person from a lower class status struggling ever since he could think independently is a valid story to depict and one that would be an inspiring one. That someone would care for him at the end and show him that it's worth carrying on, and that sometimes it takes someone else to give them the hope and a hand and not kick him in the teeth and discard him when he's not useful, which is really valid because, like, that's where we thought this was going, kind of, because you see mostly throughout the show the men in Gilead at the top, like Fred and Lawrence, and people who were actually involved in making laws and creating Gilead in some way. And then when you see these glimpses, like with Omar, of the other men in Gilead, it's just such an interesting part of the whole structure that they started to build really effectively and then just dropped off of it.
Yeah.
Even in season 5, right, there's the guardian that shows up at the Mayday camp that's helping them and then has to go back to his wife and child. Like, he still has to go back to Gilead and play the game so that he can then help. You know, he's playing both sides too.
Yeah. And at the time, I thought that was a good parallel to Nick, because
Me too.
he was married and expecting a baby. And again, is another example why later on in the show, when he's made a commander, even though he's not in the book, that's the direction the showrunners wanted to take, which fine, we'll take it. Even then, he's not given a choice to live because he is given a wife and a child straight away. Like, what is he going to do? Just, as he says in episode 9 of season 5, like, he can't just pick up and leave and leave his family behind. Like, that wouldn't make him a good man. So he again has no choice.
I mean, he does try to do that in episode 6 because he's completely unraveling at that point.
Yeah,
but
exactly. That's after he's been completely broken. Like,
exactly. Yeah. Which shows, I think that shows too, that's what he wants to do. He wants to leave. He wants to have that opportunity to get out, but he feels trapped by everything. And I mean, the responsibility of having a family in Gilead is something that they gave him to make it kind of an impossible situation. It's like a dead end for him. There's nothing he can do.
Yeah.
What, he's going to leave and then he's going to feel guilty about leaving them, or he's going to stay and hate his life, you know? Like, he doesn't have any good options, really.
he has that conversation with Twello before he actually agrees to spy for him. Like, he says, like, would you not want to be with your daughter rather than having to ask about her? And he says, like, that's a pipe dream.
Yeah.
Which that sums it up, that he would want to have that life. He just can't.
Yeah.
There's not a choice.
I mean, he talks about it all the time.
Yeah.
He talks about that's the fantasy that he's constantly clinging to, that he wishes he could have.
And he also doesn't say no. He's like, I can't do it right now.
Yeah.
When Tuello asks, and then obviously we have the scene of Mackenzie breathing down and then obviously he says no until June gets hurt.
Oh, about joining with Tuello. Yeah, because he's in a situation where he's scared for his life.
It's not a way out, that Tuello's not giving him a way out. It's not like he has all this information like Fred. He doesn't have the information that Fred had. So he doesn't have anything to trade. So his only option to leave is to be a risk to himself and to his family, to Rose and his child.
Yeah.
By spying for the Americans. So he's going to
stay in Gilead.
And stay in Gilead.
And be a commander in Gilead.
Exactly.
Because apparently you can't be good if you're a commander in Gilead. But that's exactly what he was told to do by Tuello in 2 different seasons. You have to be a double agent. That's, Kate had that whole speech about that in episode 7, I think. To be a good agent and to be valid and useful to Mayday, you need to play both parts.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where I thought we were going.
Probably where we should have been going.
We were going to see again, he's bad, he's doing bad things. And then at the end, it was going to just end like in the book, because he was never presented, his character, which is what we're talking about, just like Lawrence's character, was not presented like the same commanders, like Fred, like Cushing, like Guthrie, like Bell. And there's no scene where we see Lawrence and Nick partying it up at the Jezebels, playing golf, doing the whole gun thing that they were playing in season 1 or 2, the Commanders.
The skeet shooting or whatever they were doing. Yeah.
Whatever. That. We never see them join those Commanders, because for me, that was what the show was doing, presenting these 2 Commanders as different from the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I would go further to say that there's also a big separation between Lawrence and Nick, too. Obviously, we know that. Lawrence having created the colonies, Nick, which we can get into more further down. We're going to talk about
redemption arcs versus
the redemption arcs of different characters and Nick being villainized in the show. Yeah. So we'll get into that, too.
Also, Lawrence had more power than Nick to do these things.
From the beginning.
Since we meet him. So there's also a difference. So, yeah.
Yeah.
If a guy really did believe the Gilead bullshit of, women having to be subservient to men, I don't think Nick encapsulates that at all in any of his scenes.
No.
Never.
So I was thinking about that since we're talking about his character. It's like, I've never seen him be cruel, overtly cruel, or enjoying anything, because people talk about him enjoying the perks of being a commander. He's safe. I mean, he says it. This is the safest where I can be and my family can be. I know it sucks. I know what comes behind that, and you're fueling a machine, but it's a lot more complicated than just like, oh, he's just there, he's fueling the machine. There's a lot of people that fuel the machine, not necessarily just commanders. And I think the show kind of deviated from that. And that made me kind of sad when we got to the end, because I thought it was a very interesting topic to talk about, not just how it affects women, which is the main theme of the show, but also men.
Yeah. Definitely. Another thing I think we should definitely point out is that, like we've said, Nick was a teenager, 18, 19, when Sons of Jacob recruited him. When he joined, literally just because he needed a job, like you can see in the Price scene in the coffee shop or in the diner in season 1, episode 8, that he's not buying it. I mean, Price is misquoting the Bible. Nick is very cynical about everything. And then the word job comes up, and then he kind of looks like, okay, maybe I'm, that's the first moment in the scene where you see that he's actually
listening,
considering it, because there's a job on the table, and that's all he really cares about, is supporting his family. And just to clarify what Price actually says about the Sons of Jacob and the job offer, all Price says to explain what they do is, there's this group that wants to set things right, clean up this country. And you can hear Nick sigh in the middle of the sentence, like he's kind of over it. But then Price asks Nick to come to a meeting. And when he says maybe there's a job in it for him, that's when you see Nick straighten up in his seat. And then he's like, okay, I'm cautiously open to this now that you're saying the word job. And then Price says, you're not alone, Nick, which is something he's probably never heard anyone say to him before. But I think that it's, when you think about that and where he came from and where he is now, he's lived his entire adult life in Gilead. And the entire time he's been there, he has no one he can ask for help. He has no one he can ask for advice. He can't even ask for like basic things, like in this season, in episode 6 of this season, when he wants June to stay with him. It's like he has to make all these excuses to even like ask her to stay. It's just, he doesn't have anyone. Like, what's he going to do? He can't talk to any of the commanders there. He can't talk to his wife openly. I mean, Max said that in our interview, that he's not been fully honest with her. Of course not, because he can't trust. She's a lovely person, but she's Gilead,
Yeah.
So I can't imagine the deep loneliness that he must feel to just be completely isolated. And all of his decisions have to come from himself or from someone influencing him to do something, It's just, and every time he makes any choice that's like remotely self-focused, he just struggles so hard with it, versus June, which we'll get into when we talk about that.
Yeah. It's a really sad message to send that, even though, he was part of Gilead, but he was, as we just discussed, very young when he was recruited. He has no family left. He had a mum who abandoned him, a dad who probably abused him physically, for what we've seen this last season. His brother drank himself to death, and he's literally had no father figures that he can actually trust. He had Price, that obviously he also used him, he lied to him, and he groomed him into joining this political party when he didn't want to do that. He just wanted a job. And I think one of the things that we kind of assume is that he did trust Price. That's why he asked him to look after June. back in season 2, the scene that I just described earlier, when just before the bombing, then he gets killed, so that goes nowhere. But I feel like in that scene, Price says to him, like, you have my word. And I think Nick did believe him. And it's something similar to the way he talks to Wharton in this season. I don't think he truly trusts him, but he does want to have that sort of relationship again because he's never had it. So you can kind of maybe assume that he's always been in the lookout for that with Lawrence and everybody else. Like, I don't think he fully trusts them, but I do think deep down he does need somebody to kind of like show him what to do.
Yeah, or even just that he can have any kind of relationship with.
Yeah, any sort of relationship that's not just being used by them.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of like what he feels, right?
And you can see, I mean, in season 6, episode 1, that like when Nick has the scene with Wharton out on the beach and he's smoking and he just got back from jail, and Wharton walks up and they talk for a minute and then Wharton leaves and Nick is like, fuck. Like, you can tell that he's not just assuming like, oh, this is going to be great having him here. Like, no,
no, absolutely not.
He's stifled by these people, like taking away all of his privacy.
But it also goes to what you're saying. It goes to that scene. I don't know if it was episode 2 or episode 3 where he's also talking to Wharton. Episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people talk this season about his daddy issues. But that line where, Wharton says to him, all these men, like trying to control you. I don't have the line. But Nick says, I have never been confused about the roles these men play in life.
Yeah.
Like, even with the direction the season went, there were still tidbits in the season of the same character that we've seen of Nick throughout 6 seasons. And for me, that was one of them.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't trust these people.
Yeah. But he also has no choice but to kind of trust them a little bit because they are above him. And
no, yeah, I agree.
The point that I was trying to make is that in that scene in season 2, when he's talking to Price and he asks him to look after June or the Handmaid, he also says that, it didn't have nothing to do with him wanting to be reassigned. And I felt that was kind of a parallel to him saying that the Jezebels didn't have anything to do with the Mayday plan. So he kind of like deep down still trusts that these men who aren't they're not the horrible men that got to Jezebels, and they don't, maybe we haven't seen them abuse their power as much as maybe Fred or Putnam and all of the others. So I think that Dan maybe still has this kind of hope that that he will, these men will do at least protect women or at least, not be horrible to them. So I think there was a little bit of that.
For sure. That is a great parallel. And you see like, Wharton, like you're saying, has that with Price, that they both kind of have this piety that, I mean, even though Nick calls Price out on misquoting the Bible, like it's still, he sees them as these men who have some kind of a moral compass and some kind of like, desire to make things better maybe, or to not just be this despicable
power hungry abuser.
Yeah. So what else is he going to do really? Like, what else is Nick going to do? Like, he has to try to find somebody that seems like a little bit better of a person and
again, hope for the best.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why the only commander that we see that he aligns with voluntarily, so to speak, is with Lawrence. Because the only thing that I've seen him do for Gilead, besides being in Gilead, was not for Gilead, was for New Bethlehem. That's who he aligns himself with.
Yeah.
That's the way that I saw it.
But again, we've taken away his agency. He can't be anything else. Like you can't, apart from spying for Mayday, apart from, having these connections to Mayday and using his position of power to help the rebellion down the line. But for that, you have to still be at the top. You still have to follow orders and do horrible things, because if you don't, then they're going to know that you're not willing to do those things, that the guy that they think you are. So you can't stay in power unless you follow orders, and you do, obey the law.
Slice off parts of your soul to do things you would rather not do.
Yeah, exactly. On top of that, he's helping June do these crazy things and, getting in trouble for everything. And it's just so very difficult.
When it's like what Lauren said, they cut off the head of one commander, another pops up. Like, if Nick doesn't follow the order, somebody's going to do it. It's not like it's not going to happen because he said no. It's still going to happen. I mean, it sucks and it's terrible that he has to do those things, or that he feels he has to do those things, because the other option is that he dies.
Yeah.
But even if he dies,
and he's no use to anybody.
Right. He's no use to anybody. He's no use to June. He can't help with Hannah. He can't help her with anything. She needs his help constantly. That's all she's doing since she went to Canada, is calling him for favors. So he can't do that if he's dead, but also if he's dead, it's for nothing because the next guy is just going to pop up and do the same shit.
And it's not going to help her.
And then also that person is not going to help her. Exactly. So it's just, he's in a really, really horrible situation, clearly. But when you think about his options, he has no good option. I mean, there's nothing he can do.
Yeah, exactly that.
And also just talking more about, the evidence of who he is as a person. We've spoken about this before, but there are a lot of instances where he's around other people and you see how they treat him, like the Marthas in season 4.
Oh, yeah.
When he calls on the Marthas in the Chicago episode, I think it is, right? Episode 5, maybe, of season 4.
Yep.
Do you guys want to talk a little bit about that and just about other people maybe in that same kind of relationship to him?
I always thought that was a telling scene because the Marthas are treating him like, you can't round me up and bring me here like whenever you want to. Like, who are you? He's a commander. Like, aren't commanders supposed to be these terrible people? And they're like, are you sure you want to know about June? Like, she sucks, fuck her. And he's vulnerable. He's like, I care about her, which is a risk. I know people don't think that that's a risk, but it is. That's evidence that those Marthas have against him. If something were to go bad and they needed to save their ass, it's like, hey, I know a commander that's hot on the fugitive.
Yeah. And they also say, don't they say, or he says it's not about business.
Yeah, he says I figured it was about contraband or something like that.
Right, yeah. But that's evidence that he's obviously working with them in some capacity, that they're expecting it to be about business in Mayday or in
clearly,
black market trades or whatever it is that he's helping them with.
As a commander, yeah. And also again, my favorite season 4, the friendlies. Like, who are these people? Friendlies. They took those pictures for me. Another risk, because why is this commander taking pictures of this girl who's the daughter of a higher commander? And like all of that, like, are we supposed to forget about that? Because there's a reason why that was shown. They're just subtle hints of his character, which is obviously what we're talking about.
Well, and the people that are doing those things for him, like the friendlies and the Marthas, they're doing it for him, trusting that he's not going to report them for it too.
Exactly.
Mayday in season 2, when they trying to get June, a pregnant handmaid, out, that's incredibly risky for all of them, and they're doing it because clearly they trust this man and they've got some connection to him and some rapport with him, because otherwise they wouldn't be risking their lives for this random handmaid. I think that's really quite evident.
Definitely.
I think he even says, do you know how hard it was for me to find out that you were here?
Yeah.
He wasn't supposed to know that she was in the Boston Globe. So
yep. One other thing just to point out is that there have been things, I mean, we obviously have talked about the things that Nick was doing before he met June, but it's also important to talk about the things he's done since then that were completely unprompted. I mean, some of them were for June, and I think the 2 things that immediately come to mind for me are getting the information on Hannah.
Jezebel's letters.
And the Jezebel's letters. Getting the information on Hannah in season 4, gathering all of that, risking his life to gather that information, not knowing if he's ever going to be able to give it to June in person. That's not important to him. What's important to him is that he can help her and that he can help Hannah. So he's doing that without anyone asking him to do it. So he's already got the information when June gets there to ask him for it, So that's an important thing. And then also, Raquel, as you just said, the Jezebel's letters in season 2 when he takes them to Canada. June burned them in the sink. I mean, obviously she didn't burn them all because he stopped her, but in her mind, I think she was that was done. That wasn't even a thing that was happening anymore. Because when he comes back from Canada and tells her that the letters got out, which again, as we've said many times, he takes no credit for, even though he risked his life to do that. She is so surprised by that, I think partly because she didn't even really know he still had them, because he never told her that. She never asked him to do anything with them. So that's a huge one. And I think there's really no reason for him to have done that other than he wanted to help those women.
Those women, not June, those women.
Not June, those women.
There's something that happens from that, because they go to Canada to have some conversation, and there was going to be some political something that came out of that visit.
Yes, they were making, I believe it was about trade deals. Because Fred was trying to they were trying to get Canada to open the trade routes more, right?
Yeah, but by getting the letters out, that gets stopped. So that's against Gilead. He does that, again, completely unprompted because he wants to, and that is against Gilead.
Yeah, it harms Gilead, yeah.
They've said that he's never done anything against Gilead because he wanted to. Well, that's not true.
That's a big proof that he did. Yeah, exactly, yep.
Also, you guys were talking about the Jezebels, and I remember in season 5 when June goes to the camp with Kristen Coe's character.
Lily?
Lily, thank you. When she goes talk to Lily, Lily asks her, like, is he this big Jezebel guy? And June says no. And then this season, when we have that scene with Janine and Nick, you can also see that he is not a Jezebel guy. He doesn't go to Jezebel's.
Yep.
So that also character.
Right.
Which it's really his demise, because if he had, then it probably wouldn't have been such a red flag for Belle.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably wouldn't never had to keep those Mayday plan out away, sorry.
The same letters. Just kind of, I guess that was maybe a callback.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I presume that probably was going to be some clever full circle thing. We were talking about how many people have mentioned that Nick was a good man.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. We kind of talked about Tuello in season 5, episode 10, saying that, I would call you an honorable man to Nick, but there are a lot of other characters throughout the show that have said things like that to him, or have not even to him, like Moira has done.
Yeah. I think an episode after she comes back with a file, Moira says
9 of season 4.
409. Now we have a good man in Gilead.
Mm-hmm.
There's also what June says, and when she's talking to Esther, Gilead makes it really hard to be good, or there's good men in Gilead.
Yeah.
June says that.
There's good men everywhere, even in Gilead.
Season 4.
Yeah, and you kind of assume that she's thinking about him there. I mean, we don't know for sure, but I always assumed that was what she was thinking.
Then there's the line Luke says at the end in episode 10. Yay. And what Serena tells her, which I think it's important. It just sucks that it comes from Serena when she says, if Nick would have thought that he had a choice, which I think is very important.
Yep.
Because we're talking about that he didn't have a choice. He would have chosen you.
And would have chosen to leave, which is, we can probably get into this more in the Serena segment, but also like, that's kind of an insane thing for Serena to say, because in episode 6 of season 6, when June is like, I came here to ask Nick to leave with me, to Serena, just bullshitting. And Serena is like, oh, why would he do that? He's got his wife here and stuff. And it's like, well, you just contradicted yourself. Because
Well, isn't the whole last season a fucking contradiction?
A giant contradiction. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the line of him being dishonest.
Dishonest. When I heard that yesterday, I'm like, awesome. This is just great. The only thing that I noticed differently, which it doesn't matter anymore, is that June looked like she was trying to gaslight herself. Like, she didn't say it, at least maybe that's what I hoped for. She didn't say it like, oh, well, fuck him. He led a dishonest life. It felt like she was just like trying to convince herself of it. Like, me and Melissa kind of like grabbed that. It doesn't matter. It's done, but I hate it.
Yeah, I hate it too.
I hate it.
It doesn't make any sense for her to say that.
Because even if we want to grab onto it, people are saying, he never did anything. He never did anything. Fine. He was never shown to have done anything for Gilead. Oh, fine. But to her, to June, he was a hero because he did everything for her.
Well, and she knows it because she constantly uses him for that. I mean, she knows, and people keep telling her he's going to show up for you. He'll do anything for you. She says it to Luke in season 4, episode 9. He would do anything for me and for Nicole. So she knows that.
And he did.
Yep. Unprompted and over again.
But you decided not to forgive him because I don't fucking understand why.
Nope.
And again, I've asked this 20 times, but I've never got an answer. When did people tell her, besides Holly, that he was going to betray her? That this was coming? Who? When? What scene? What episode?
Yeah, and why is Lauren suddenly thinking that after
he saved him?
Yeah, after he saved him, and also in season 5, episode 8, when he's trying to persuade June to come to New Bethlehem, and he says to her, he's always had your back. You know that about Nick.
I think we discussed that in episode 8, that he's just trying to
manipulate her,
go ahead with
For sure.
with her mindset of like, yeah, like you hating him, so I just want your help, and I want you to trust me instead.
Yeah,
you need somebody in the inside. I don't want it to be Nick because I want it to be me, because if I go back, they're gonna put me on the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When June says that Nick led a violent and dishonest life, it's just that he's never ever been dishonest to her. And if you guys can think of any examples where he was, then please share them. But he's always been very honest with her. He told her that he was a knife from the start. straight up she asks, and he tells her. He doesn't hesitate.
Which could literally have, wasn't there something in the book about that being treason for him to have said that to her?
Well, he actually doesn't say it in the book.
That's right, but isn't there something about that? Maybe, oh, you know what, it's in the script. It's in the script, I think. I think it says in the script this was treason for him to say this to her.
Yeah, I've got, well, there's a few like sentences in the book that actually shows him how like he's like him being illegal, he can't talk to her, like again, like there's a lot of things like he shouldn't share with her that they really do share, but he tells her he knows about Emily and her connection to the Mayday.
In the book he tells her that?
No, this is in episode 2 when he's like, she's dangerous, you need to be careful with her. That means that he knows about Emily and her connection to Mayday, because that's where they afterwards, that's why June gets interrogated by that eye. And then that's another point that I wanted to make, but they're using Nick being an eye as a reason for him to be mistrusted and be a horrible person that does horrible things. But we know that he knew about Emily and he's not the one that reports her. We know it's the aunt. So that's an example of him not reporting on innocent civilians. We've seen him only reporting on commanders, and we've seen him having information that he could have shared or reported about Emily, and he didn't. He tells her that he has tried to stop her from getting interrogated about Emily. She knows he can't turn commanders in like he does with Cushing, so she knows the extent of what his job as an eye is. Tells her about being deported to the front when he will fight for Gilead, obviously. So she knows that he's going to be a soldier in Gilead.
A soldier in Gilead, yeah.
He could have lied about that. Tells her that when you get in bed with the government, it's not so easy to get out. So obviously that means that he has had some dealings with mistrusting politicians.
Yeah, and with the politicians, like being disillusioned with them, I guess.
Yeah.
With what they're offering or
promising
or
that they have their own agendas.
Right.
He tells her about his background, that he was uneducated and that he would have been a no one to her. Again, he's very honest about who he was before. He doesn't try to pretend that he's this big guy to enamor her. Tells her about his marriage and the pregnancy. He reports word by word Luke's message to her in season 2. He didn't have to. Still, he's very honest with her.
When he comes back from Canada.
Gathers information on Hannah and gives it to her the moment he has a chance. He doesn't use it for anything else. He just gives it to her. When has she ever asked him a question and he's lied about it?
And he's the one that tells Tuello, let me tell June about Rose.
That's true, yeah.
You know, let me tell her, you know. So, like, again, I agree with you. I've never seen him be dishonest about who he is.
And even the violent line is obviously we know that he's had to do horrible things in Gilead, but so is June, so is everyone who's survived Gilead. And she presents that line as if that's a choice that he made. And I know you can say that he made the choice to join, all of that, but once you're in, and all we've really seen from him is how horrified he's been by the violence. You haven't seen him become immune to it or become used to it. It hurts him every time. And you see it every time that it hurts him.
Also, the respect he also shows for her relationship with Luke.
Yeah.
He's always been very respectful. I know people are going to say, oh, he wanted to run away with her because she gave him hope,
That was the last moment though. And she already said to him that she was staying with him out of guilt and out of duty.
Exactly.
That's different.
Exactly. What I was trying to say is, like, he always knew that she was going to go back to Luke. He had no problem. He voices his frustration, which I think he has a right to do, because it's like, you keep calling me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I keep seeing you and I'm trying to move on, but I can't. And then she tells him, I love you. I loved you. Love corrects herself and tells him, I'm here. So she gave him hope. So obviously he's going to try to grab onto the only thing that he has ever wanted in his life, which is to be with her and to be with his daughter. Because when he was planning to go to Paris, he doesn't say, let's go. He says, we can go get your mom and Holly.
Yep.
He always asks about his daughter. People think that he doesn't, but again, he's not wearing t-shirts. I hate Gilead. I'm with them. I love my daughter. Like,
But he talks about it constantly in the show. I mean, he brings her up. He asks about her. June knows he's going to ask about her because in like episode 3, that's the first thing she says to Nick when she sees him in the woods. Like, she's okay. First thing she says, because she knows that's his first concern is going to be about that. At the end of that episode, when he wants June to go back and protect herself and take care of their daughter, like he's always focused on that. That's his primary goal, is for them to be safe. Yeah. So, yep.
One of the most tragic things about Nick is that he thought he was nothing, and that's exactly what he's ended up being. And the fact that he cared so much about his daughter and he risked his life several times to get her out, to get a better life, and she will never know who he is and what he did for her. And that's really flipping sad.
It is.
It's extremely depressing. And the fact that they didn't give him any kind of
a decent ending,
dignified anything at the end. It was just nothing. There was just, he got on a plane because he was stuck and
he's gone. He deserved it.
He got on a plane because his wife asked him to go be safe. And then that's it.
It wasn't even his choice.
No.
It was his wife's.
Everybody got grace, but he didn't get grace, if we see it that way.
Yep. Well, Rachel, I think you have some things to say about the moral standards of Nick versus June next.
Yes, I do. So I'm going to be referencing a couple articles with quotes from Elizabeth Moss, Eric Tuchman, and Yellen Chang. One of the articles is from The Wrap called "The Handmaid's Tale Cast Unpacks Nick's Shocking Episode 6 Decision. We Make Mistakes Under Duress," which was a quote from Max. And then an Us Weekly article called "Handmaid's Tale Showrunners Tease How June and Nick's Relationship Changes Ahead of Series Finale," with quotes from Eric Tuchman and Yellen Chang. So since we saw the events unfold over episodes 606 and 607, I have been struggling with two primary thoughts. First, what happened to the women at Jezebel's was indeed tragic, but what Nick did does not come across as an actual betrayal to me. Nick did not walk into his house that night with the intention of giving the intel to Wharton. The intel was bullied out of him in a terrifying and threatening way. Also, Nick gave Wharton the rebel plan, but he had no idea the extreme measures against the women at Jezebel's that Wharton was going to take as a result. Yes, Nick gave Wharton this information to save his own life, but considering that June was still in New Bethlehem and considered a fugitive, June would have also been in trouble had Nick been arrested. And in addition, he was still working as a double agent spying for the Americans. And as he told Mark Twello in episode 603, "I'm no good to you dead." In my opinion, Nick saved more than just himself in that moment, but for the sake of argument, since Elizabeth Moss, Eric Tuchman, and Yellen Chang are trying very hard to convince the audience in multiple interviews that Nick's actions were only selfish and his act somehow revealed who he really is and where his true allegiance lies, in other words, with Gilead, for the sake of argument, let's say Nick only acted to save himself. In the Wrap article, Elizabeth Moss said, with regards to Nick's betrayal, "Absolutely not. She can't forgive him. June has done some questionable things, but she has always done it in the interest of the good guys. Nick is responsible for the deaths of these innocent women, and he didn't need to do that. And he does it to protect himself. It's unforgivable, and I think June knows that." Which brings me to the second thought I have had. How can June not understand the choice Nick made? Hasn't she done the same herself? Haven't innocent people died as a consequence of her own actions, as a consequence of choices she has made for her own survival, even for reasons that were, quite frankly, selfish and only served herself, not necessarily the good guys? I think Elizabeth Moss and June need to do a thorough rewatch of The Handmaid's Tale because it seems they've both forgotten a few things. So let's review. In season 2, episode 3, when Omar is notified that the safe house he is supposed to take June to has been compromised and he is supposed to abort his mission and leave June behind, was it not for June's own survival that June forced Omar to take her with him? Omar and his family are caught. Maybe a neighbor saw or heard June in their apartment and reported them. Maybe someone spotted June standing in their open window. Regardless of how it happened, Omar and his family are caught. Omar is executed and hung on the wall. His wife, Heather, is made a handmaid, and their son, Adam, is given to another family as a consequence of June's actions for her own self-preservation. It is also worthy to remember June has a mental breakdown after she learns what happened to Omar and his family. When Nick sees how she isn't well, he tries to get her help by asking Serena to find a doctor to treat June's mental state. After Nick begins to break himself in season 6, after what he had to do, killing the Guardians to protect June, Luke, and Moira, and after his actions unintentionally killed the women at Jezebel's, June does not treat Nick with any understanding or sensitivity or love. She suddenly only sees him as a monster. In season 3, June is responsible for the deaths of Hannah's Martha Francis and her walking partner Natalie after she makes an attempt to visit Hannah at her school. While I think the viewer always empathizes or sympathizes with the pain June goes through being separated from her daughter, and while I think we can all understand June's desire to see Hannah, even if it's only for a second, the fact remains this was a selfish act on June's part that led to the deaths of 2 people, as well as the relocation of Hannah and the Mackenzies. Hannah also tragically loses her Martha, who I am sure was loving and kind to her and who Hannah obviously loved in return, while also being separated from any friends she had made at her school. In episode 607, June says to Nick, "You gave up those women to save yourself." First of all, no, he didn't. Nick gave up the plan, unaware of what the consequences of that would be. It is very likely he felt this was safe intel to reveal because while it may kill this plan of Mayday's, they can always come up with another plan. Wharton is the one who made the decision to take such extreme actions against the women at Jezebel's. Even Nick said, "I never said it was them. I never said the girls had anything to do with it. I didn't think he would do that." So Nick was cornered, and in a moment of panic and self-preservation, he made a choice that resulted in innocent women being killed as a result. This should trigger in June some sympathy and understanding for Nick's situation, as well as guilt in herself, because she has been through very close to the exact same thing herself. But since both June and Elizabeth Moss seem to have forgotten this, let's remind them. In season 3, episode 11, June also found herself cornered and in a terrifying situation herself when Commander Winslow is preparing to rape her at Jezebel's, and instead of submitting to rape one more time, June fights back, killing Winslow as a result. The Marthas do a very thorough job cleaning up after June in one of the best montages I had ever seen on the show. However, in season 4, episode 2, June learns from a woman named Daisy, who is a Jezebel at a different location, that they cleaned house at the Boston Jezebels after Winslow went missing. We don't get specific details of what that meant. However, since Daisy says she was one of the lucky ones, it is a safe assumption the other women were either killed or sent to the colonies to die slowly. We don't see this happen the way we were shown the brutality of the women being executed at Wharton's orders in 607. However, it is a safe assumption that the women at the Boston Jezebels faced extreme punishment due to June acting in her own self-preservation. This doesn't seem to teach June a lesson about how her actions can have severe consequences on others, however, as in that same episode, she immediately decides she wants to take some rebel action against the Chicago commanders who frequent this other Jezebel's location. She decides to poison them. Or should I say, June brings the poison and the women at Jezebel's do the poisoning. June walks away, feeling proud of herself, and leaves safely. However, actions always have consequences in Gilead, and there was no way the women at Jezebel's weren't going to face severe punishment after 9 commanders ended up in the hospital and 6 ended up dead, according to Commander Lawrence in 403. And speaking of season 4, episode 3, Nick spent that episode focused on doing whatever he could to keep June alive, while in season 6, episode 7, June apparently would have preferred Nick to choose death. For good measure, I will also point out that after June does withstand a fair amount of torture herself in season 4, episode 3, resisting giving up the location of her friends, she also chooses to protect her handmaid friends over Beth and Sienna, her Martha friends from Lawrence's house. And when Hannah is threatened, she eventually gives up the location of her handmaid friends anyway, similar to Nick giving up intel to save herself and her daughter. I also want to add that while Nick's actions had horrific consequences he did not intend, Nick also had the decency to be devastated by this outcome. I applaud Max Minghell's acting in the scene after June and Nick first exit the closet at the beginning of season 6, episode 7. The raw anguish and guilt on his face and in his voice was gut-wrenching. Nick was blindsided by Wharton's choice. Yes, Nick acted to save himself, but he didn't realize how severe the consequences would be. Meanwhile, after all the examples I have gone through of severe consequences and lives lost due to June's actions over and over again, the only time we see her experience true remorse is when she learns what happens to Omar and his family. She looked angry at Frances when she helped execute her. She seemed gleeful in the market when Natalie has her final mental break and is shot and dragged out by guardians. She didn't seem to react much at all when she learned the fate of the women at the Boston Jezebels after she killed Winslow, even doubling down with a new plan to poison more commanders, which will ultimately hurt more women as a result. With all of these consequences of her own actions and piles of innocent victims in her own wake, June has the nerve to say to Nick, "You gave up those women to save yourself." A statement that is both factually inaccurate and unfair, as well as hypocritical given what she has been responsible for herself. My hope after watching season 6, episode 7, was that this experience with Nick would force June to do some serious self-reflection and realize that while what happened was tragic, she really is in no position to judge anyone who was unintentionally responsible for the death of others, especially because the Mayday plan that Nick revealed to Wharton most likely would have resulted in unintentional deaths anyway, had they gone through with it. The women at Jezebel's had already been considered collateral damage by the Mayday crew before June mentioned them being caught in the crossfire. Their attitude was, this is war. But now that that plan was foiled, Mayday cares about the women who died. Nick is a Nazi and June is blamed for trusting him when she has been given absolutely no reason whatsoever to not trust him. After Nick just risked his life to save Luke and Moira's lives, after he murdered 2 guardians to protect all of them, after risking his life further, working as a double agent spying for the Americans for months, why wouldn't June trust him? And why is this one action on Nick's part supposed to be enough to erase everything Nick has done to help her, protect her, comfort her, and love her and their daughter for years? How could June forget that Nick risked his life trying to get her out of Gilead twice? Nick risked his life when he stopped June from burning the letters from Jezebel's in season 2, episode 5, taking the letters himself for safekeeping. A man loyal to Gilead would have wanted to burn those letters, to destroy the evidence of contraband. But he saw them as something important and precious. We see this in his scene with Eden, when he finds the letters and he acts out of fear to ensure that letters remain safe. He risked his life when he took those letters with him to Canada, unprompted, hoping to find a way to get them out. Did June also forget how he delivered Fred, her rapist, to her practically on a silver platter for her to murder, along with all the other former handmaids? Or did June also forget when Nick gathered intel on Hannah, also unprompted, through a network of friendlies complete with current pictures of Hannah and her current location? He delivers this to her saying, "I never thought I'd give this to you in person." While he did this for her because he loved her, he didn't do this as a way to see her or to gain anything for himself. In the Us Weekly interview with Eric Tuchman, Eric says, while Nick has saved her many times, that's only a part of his day. The other vast majority of his time is spent as a Gilead commander, and he rose from a driver to commander, so he must have been doing something to contribute to that ascent. Yes, we saw what Nick did for his promotions. In season 2, episode 5, Nick is issued a woman as a promotion from Fred as punishment for showing his concern for June when he asked Serena to get June a mental health doctor. We also saw Nick be promoted to commander after he held Fred at gunpoint at the end of season 2 to buy June and Nicole the time they needed to get out of Gilead. And this is a quote from Yellen Chang. Nick has had many opportunities to leave and to leave with June. He's been in Canada and he has made the choice time and time again to go back to Gilead and to double down on Gilead. We saw Nick's attempt to work with Mayday at the beginning of season 2 to try to get June out while pregnant with their child. We saw what a long process that was and how incredibly dangerous it was to just try to get one person out of Gilead. Yellen Chang's quote makes it sound like it has always been easy to leave Gilead, despite how easy that has looked in season 6, which I assume is due to New Bethlehem's open trade routes. Perhaps there are less checkpoints now. But back in the day of true Gilead, I always thought the show made clear that getting out was extremely dangerous and difficult to the point of being impossible. Despite Nick saying, "I should have just driven away with you, and I should have run away with you when I had the chance," and also despite Mark Twello indicating that, as an I, Nick could have run away with June when they were at the Waterfords, I think the failed attempt to get June out illustrates how difficult to impossible something like that actually was. I have also always assumed that Nick would never be reckless with June's life. He would never make an attempt to drive off or run away with her unless he was absolutely certain there wasn't a solid plan in place that would keep her safe. In a place like Gilead, it is nearly impossible to achieve that level of certainty, and it always made sense to me why Nick mostly played it safe. Also, the time and time again that Nick has been in Canada and has returned to Gilead, let's not forget that actions have consequences in Gilead as well. In season 2, episode 9, when Nick travels with the Waterfords to Canada, he is also married to Eden back in Gilead. Had Nick chosen to defect and not return with the Waterfords, Eden would have been punished, probably questioned, and even tortured for information on Nick's whereabouts, as well as the rest of the Waterford household, including June. It is the same situation in season 4, episode 9, when Nick meets June and Nicole at the school. At that point in time, he's married to Rose, who would have been the one to face the consequences if Nick had chosen to leave. In season 5, episode 10, when Mark Twello meets Nick at the border to escort him to the hospital where June is, Nick finally makes the agreement with Twello to spy for the Americans in exchange for seeing June and ensuring that Mark will do whatever he can to keep June and Nicole safe. How was Nick supposed to leave Gilead then? The whole point was to stay in Gilead and spy for the Americans for a period of time before he will be rewarded with his freedom. Another quote from Yellen: "We felt like as storytellers, we would be dishonest if we didn't incorporate those choices that he's already made into showing what he is like and what his character's really like." She later says that now June has to really confront who Nick is since he has revealed his character, his true character, at the end of the episode. Well, if their attempt to show us what Nick is really like and what his true character is was the scene of Nick being terrified and cornered by Wharton, causing him to give up the Mayday plan in order to save himself, as well as June, by the way. This example did not show me that Nick's true allegiance is to Gilead. I only saw him react in a very human way that most people would. Since that episode has aired, the reaction from the audience overwhelmingly has been, what was he supposed to do? And it is very upsetting to me that June apparently would have preferred that Nick ended up on the wall rather than do what he did. It is so disappointing how the EPs and writers have decided to shortchange Nick's character after all the good he's done for years to just a commander. The fact that he's a commander in a dangerous place and still chooses to do good things should count for something. But it's like the EPs are trying to work a Jedi mind trick on the audience to convince us that we haven't seen Nick do good things for June and the others for 5.5 seasons, risking his life doing so multiple times, and are also trying to convince us that what we saw Nick do with Wharton was a lot worse than it actually was. Because in that moment, all I saw Nick do was have a very human moment of self-preservation and due largely to Max Minghela's extremely nuanced and layered performance. All that was revealed to me is how human and vulnerable Nick is, just like everyone else. And as I have just given many examples of, June has also been guilty of herself. It does seem as though Nick is being measured against different standards of morality next to other characters on this show, especially June, but also characters like Serena, who was a true mastermind behind Gilead and still supports many of the foundational ideals she has always believed in deep into the final season. We have also seen the violent acts that Serena has done, including initiating the violent rape of June at 9 months pregnant. Or what about Commander Lawrence, who is also a true architect of Gilead? In the end, Lawrence gets redemption as he sacrifices himself for a worthy cause. Serena gets actual forgiveness from June before she also gets redemption and a fresh start with her baby, but not Nick. As show canon only illustrates, one mistake in a moment of panic and acting in self-preservation, which unintentionally results in multiple innocent lives lost, apparently erases his entire story for 5.5 seasons and reduces him to just a commander and unworthy of forgiveness or even being remembered after his death. Done.
Standing ovation. Amazing.
Woo! Oh my God, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it was chef's kiss on that speech.
Yay!
I should alert everyone to the fact that I was just holding up signs for Rachel about how great this was while I was on mute, and I completely derailed the entire beautiful speech she was giving.
Like the delivery was also perfect.
Yeah.
Emphasize the things.
Yes. The comedic time. You had comedic timing in there, which is great.
Yeah.
Yay!
Superb. I think like we should just print a book of it and then call it the Nick Blaine Conspiracy. A guidance to script writing onto how to not gaslight your audience.
Yes.
We'll just quietly publish it, post a picture of the published work as our last Instagram post. And I was thinking of another thing too, just Rachel, when you were saying about how, what did you say? Something you said about June not knowing who Nick was. There we go. That's what it was. When you said the thing about, I think it was the Yellen quote, where she's now having to see who he really is, basically.
Yeah. She has to confront who Nick is as he's revealed his character, something like that.
Yeah. So I was thinking earlier too, how the Tuello board that we keep coming back to from season 4.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's got all of Nick's history and his background and Facebook posts and SOJ stuff and Sons of Jacob stuff. June's just sitting in that room with Tuello planning with him.
He was right next to it.
She clearly knows all of that and saw all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is season 4 and didn't seem surprised by it. And also, I mean, to me, that's pretty solid evidence that she knows all of that and she knows who he really is. So whatever there is to uncover, good or bad, she knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's just, it doesn't make any sense that she's suddenly discovering something about him that she never knew, and it's changing how she sees him. I mean, this was in the episode before her testimony, when she saw this information and had this from Tuello. A couple episodes later, she's at the school wishing they could run off together. You know, it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing makes sense. Like, I mean, until the end of season 4, it made sense. But season 5, season 6, like, incorporating things that happened before would like, no.
There's nothing more to say. You've covered it. I mean, I know there are probably a lot more selfish acts June has done that we could list for the next 10 hours.
Oh yeah, that was like scratching the surface, honestly.
I know, seriously.
All right, so that's a wrap on our character studies of June Osborne and Nick Blaine. Come back next week for episode 2 of our meta mini series, where we'll be covering feminism, history, and politics. Thanks for listening.
Bye.